Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's jump right in, because today we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating paradoxes in human history. Imagine, if you will, meeting a guy who literally never wrote a single book, a man who straight up claimed he didn't have the answers to anything. And yet, this exact person fundamentally rewired the way humanity thinks forever. We are talking about a thinker whose ideas, over 2.5 millennia later, are still the bedrock of education at the world's greatest universities. His name, of course, was Socrates. Now, if you had passed him on the street back then, you honestly wouldn't have looked twice. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about him at all. He wasn't a king dripping in jewels, he wasn't some conquering general, and he definitely wasn't a wealthy politician. He was just an ordinary-looking guy in Athens who walked around the ancient streets barefoot, wearing really simple, everyday clothes. But what made Socrates so legendary had nothing to do with his appearance. His ultimate power was actually his voice, and specifically, the incredibly simple, piercing questions he asked. Section 1. The Philosopher Without Books. So you might be wondering, how do we actually know so much about a philosopher who never bothered to write anything down? It's a great question. The irony of Socrates is that our entire understanding of his life and his philosophy comes entirely through his students, mostly guys like Plato and Xenophon. Plato actually admired his teacher so much that he essentially made Socrates the star character in his own written dialogues. And what they recorded was that Socrates didn't view himself as a normal teacher. He didn't stand on a stage giving long, boring lectures or telling people exactly what to think. Instead, he called himself a midwife. Think about that. Just like a midwife helps deliver a baby without actually creating it, Socrates believed his job wasn't to just hand people knowledge. His purpose was to guide them, helping them uncover the profound truths that were actually already hidden right there inside their own minds. And that brings us right to what is probably his most famous mic drop statement. I know that I know nothing. To a lot of people, both back then and honestly even today, this sounds like a total admission of ignorance. Like, why would a supposed genius admit he doesn't know anything? Well, for Socrates, admitting your own ignorance wasn't a weakness at all. It was the absolute mandatory first step toward genuine wisdom. Because the very second you convince yourself you already know everything, your mind completely closes and you stop learning. That humble admission of not having all the answers, that became the foundation for his legendary teaching style. Section 2. The Socratic Method. By completely taking his own ego out of the equation, he created this framework for relentless questioning. And the process was brilliantly simple but devastatingly effective. It always kicked off with someone making a super confident claim. For instance, Socrates would walk up to a soldier and ask, "What is courage?" The soldier would probably say, "Courage means never retreating in battle." Then comes step 2, a careful, highly targeted question. Socrates would calmly ask, "Okay, well, what if a strategic retreat actually saves the entire army? Is that cowardice or is that actually wisdom?" And boom, suddenly the soldier's original definition completely falls apart. Step 3 is that realization of ignorance. Question after question, people began to realize that their rock-solid beliefs were often just fragile opinions. And he wasn't doing this to embarrass them. He was trying to replace false certainty with honest, open curiosity. And this beautifully illustrates exactly why this method has stuck around for 2,500 years. If you walk into a top-tier law school, medical school, or business school today, you're going to see the Socratic method right there in action. Professors still use it because they know that deep, real understanding doesn't come from just memorizing a textbook. True understanding is built by learning how to ask much better, deeper questions. Section 3. The Cost of Questioning. Now, as you can probably guess, constantly questioning the very foundations of your society comes with a really heavy price tag. Asking these kinds of questions made Socrates a massive target. To really understand why he was so controversial, we have to look at the timeline. Socrates lived during the Golden Age of Athens, which was this incredible era of open debate. It was the birthplace of democracy, art, new ideas were everywhere. But then, tragedy hits with the disastrous Peloponnesian War. Athens suffered brutal military defeats, which led to intense political instability and a ton of social fear. Almost overnight, post-war Athens stopped being a place of open minds and became a society absolutely terrified of anyone challenging traditional beliefs. When times get scary, societies crave rigid certainty. And unfortunately for Socrates, breaking down certainty was literally his life's work, which led him directly to his infamous trial. See, the young folks in Athens absolutely loved following Socrates around. They thought it was hilarious watching powerful politicians and so-called experts squirm while Socrates questioned them. But the city's leaders, they saw him as a massive, dangerous threat.
They basically said he was actively encouraging the youth to question authority, challenge traditions, and reject accepted beliefs. So they dragged him into court with two very heavy accusations: corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods of Athens. Now, during this trial, they gave him multiple chances to just save his own life. He could have just apologized, he could have promised to stop asking questions, or he could have just kept his mouth shut. But he boldly, completely refused.
Section 4. The unexamined life. He refused to back down because in his mind, living a life where he wasn't completely free to seek the truth was a fate way worse than death itself. Standing right there, facing his accusers, he delivered what has to be one of the most powerful, ringing statements in human history: the unexamined life is not worth living. For him, our greatest responsibility as humans isn't growing our bank accounts or accumulating status, or even just keeping our physical bodies alive. Our ultimate, supreme responsibility is taking care of our soul. Socrates noticed that almost everybody spends their entire life on pure autopilot. You know the drill. We wake up, we go to work, we earn money, we chase whatever society tells us is success, and we just repeat that exact same routine until we die, all without ever stopping to just ask, why? Why am I even doing this? What actually matters to me? Are these dreams even mine, or did someone else just hand them to me? Conscious living is the exact opposite. It means constantly examining your actions, your beliefs, and your core values. Without that self-examination, Socrates argued, we aren't even really living, we're just reacting. Section 5. Virtue as true knowledge. This brings us to another one of his incredibly fascinating and honestly kind of counterintuitive ideas. Socrates firmly believed that all virtue is just a form of knowledge. Now, you might be thinking, hold on, don't people knowingly lie, cheat, and do terrible things all the time? Socrates would actually say, no, not in the way we think. His argument was that every single human being is ultimately just seeking what they genuinely believe is good for themselves in that specific moment. So when someone does something harmful or destructive, they aren't purposely choosing evil. They're just operating under a really tragic misunderstanding of what the true good actually is. They are completely blind to the massive long-term damage they're causing just to get a hit of temporary pleasure. The source material uses this brilliant modern analogy to explain this, and it's so spot on. Smoking. Think about it. A smoker already has the information that cigarettes are bad for them. The facts are literally printed right there on the box. But Socrates would argue that just having information is not the same thing as having true knowledge. If that person genuinely, truly understood at the deepest possible emotional and spiritual level the absolute damage that habit was causing to their existence, they would naturally automatically stop. Real knowledge actually changes your behavior. So for Socrates, ignorance wasn't just missing a few facts on a test, it was a failure to deeply understand reality enough to actually make wise choices. Section 6. The modern Socratic path. So how in the world do we apply a 2,500-year-old philosophy to our lives right now? Honestly, I'd argue these ideas have literally never been more relevant. We live in an age where we are just drowning in endless information, constant opinions, and social media algorithms that practically spoon-feed us exactly what to think and how to feel. In a world that will not stop shouting answers at us, genuine wisdom has actually become incredibly rare. Socrates is here to remind us that intelligence isn't about the sheer volume of trivia you can recite or how many answers you think you have. True intelligence is measured by the quality, the depth, and the courage of the questions you're willing to ask. The greatest journey you'll ever take isn't on a plane, it's the journey inward. So let's channel a little bit of Socrates for a second and look directly at your own life. Question your beliefs. Don't just blindly accept an idea simply because everybody else around you believes it. Ask yourself why you actually hold the convictions you do. Are they really yours? Question your habits. Look really closely at your daily routines. Think about that autopilot mode we talked about earlier. Are you just waking, working, and earning just to do it all over again tomorrow? Are you accidentally living someone else's life entirely because you haven't paused to examine your own? Question your fears. What is actually holding you back right now? Are your fears, or even your personal ideas of what success looks like, genuinely something you created? Or are they just handed down to you by society, your friends, or the algorithm on your phone? And finally, question yourself. This is the ultimate Socratic invitation. It's a challenge to think deeply, to relentlessly seek the truth, and above all, to never, ever stop learning, to actually treat your own soul with the conscious respect it deserves by checking in on it every single day. And I'm going to leave you with this final, lingering thought from our explainer today. Socrates' legacy is not about just memorizing some dusty ancient quotes.
It is an active, living challenge to every single one of us. True wisdom begins the moment you have the courage to admit that you still have something to learn. So my question for you today is this: what part of your life is currently unexamined? And do you have the courage right now to finally start asking the right questions?